want more. Let Africa be free for its people. Yeah, we wanna be free in our motherland. Break all the barriers, yeah, and the boundaries holding us apart. Africa must unite, yeah. We unite or we perish, yeah.
Aye, Mama Africa, Africa muye. Aye, Mama Africa, now you want we get. Break down the borders, let us live together. We are one family, united forever. Aye, Mama Africa, Africa for Africans.
For equality and growth in our continent, Africa, we don't need borders. For inclusiveness and sustainability, yeah, break all the borders. For meaningful contribution in creating the Africa we want, we don't need borders. To iron out our differences as a family, yeah. Break all the borders. Africa for all Africa.
Aye, Mama Africa,
Africa,
Africa muye.
Madam Mama Africa.
Aye, Mama Africa, now you want we get.
Africa, your name.
Break down the borders, let us live together. We are one family, united forever. Aye, Mama Africa, Africa for Africans.
We want Africa without borders. Hey, yeah. Borderless Africa, Africa rising says. Let our people move, remove visa restrictions. Free movement of Africans in Africa. Ooh, borderless Africa. We want a borderless Africa. Hey.
Aye, Mama Africa, Africa muye.
Madam Mama Africa.
Aye, Mama Africa, now you want we get.
Africa, your name.
Break down the borders, let us live together. We are one family, united forever. Aye, Mama Africa, Africa for Africans.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I greet you all from the beautiful province of Zambia. I'm so grateful that every one of us took time to join our wonderful webinar, a very timely webinar, looking at everything that is currently happening in Africa. So just a few things to note. We have an interpreter on the call. If you're using a phone, just kindly go down. You'll be able to see 3 dots. And on those 3 dots, you'll be able to see interpretation, and you can join the interpretation that is convenient for you. We have interpretation in English, we have interpretation in French as well. Then also just note that this webinar is also being shared live on our Facebook platform as well as on our YouTube platform. Also, for interaction purposes, feel free to type your messages, your questions, or any contributions that you have in a chat, and we'll definitely be able to see them. So without further ado, we are also recording the call. Just take note of that. So thank you so much once again for joining our webinar, the Pan-African Solidarity Convening that is taking place here today. I greet you all. Good afternoon, wherever you are. Good morning for those that are still in the morning. First, I'll introduce myself once again. My name is Angela Ngulube, and currently, I'm sitting in Lusaka currently. That just shows that I could easily move, but I'm currently in Lusaka. So I'll allow the speakers on this call today to introduce themselves. I will start with the lady on the call. Just kindly unmute yourself and also just introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for this space. Hi, Angela. Thank you for moderating the conversation. And thank you for the African Rising Team to organizing this space. My name is Lalaina. It's a Malagasy name, so I'm from Madagascar, based in Madagascar, but I'm a member of African Rising. So I just want to say just a little bit about my name. My name, which is a Malagasy name, means beloved. So I am a very Malagasy proud activist in the country, but also as a Pan-Africanist in the region. So my work is about people power because I think I just love people and democracy values. And I will speak a little bit about it, but I have background also in youth development. I believe in youth power. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone.
Thank you so much, Lalaina. It's beautiful to actually know the meaning of your name, such a beautiful meaning. I will move on to the next speaker. Just feel free to unmute yourself, Mohammed.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Mohammed Saif. I'm a Sudanese political activist. I'm based actually right now in Nairobi, Kenya. I'm a student. We just completed my bachelor's degree in international relations and security studies. And I'm a member of Rakiza Democratic Forum, which seeks, it's an organization that seeks democratic reforms in the Sudan, and currently working on bringing about youth effort, consolidating Sudanese youth effort in ending the current ongoing civil war. Thank you, and I'm grateful for African Risings Group for inviting me to be a speaker in this great webinar. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. We're looking forward to getting your context and analysis on this very important discussion. I'll allow for Kasongo. Are you on the call? Is Kasongo on the call? Okay, we can go to Hadi.
Yes, if you can hear me, greetings, everyone. My name is Hadi Yakubu. I'm a borderless African, an African citizen based in Accra, Ghana. It is a privilege and pleasure to be with you all today to discuss Pan-African solidarity within the context of a shrinking civic space in our beloved Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hadi. I see two of our speakers are not yet on the call, but I believe they'll be able to join us soon. So we'll continue the conversation as we're waiting for them to join us on the call. So I think we can go on. So looking at this critical conversation that we are having currently with repression happening across Africa, we saw it fit that we have such a conversation, bring different speakers who are critical to this space to discuss what is really happening here in different African countries. We've seen repressions happening for activists in Gambia. We've seen repressions happening in Nairobi. So with that given, I would like to call upon Hadi to just give us a grounding, an analysis of what are these current trends. If you look at the current trends that are happening, this wave of repression that is happening in Africa, I would like to call upon you to just also share with us what you think is defining these trends of repression, and how are these authoritarian tactics spreading or being copied across Africa? Because if you look at the trends and you analyze, it looks like there's more of a coordinated effort in repression as opposed to solidarity. So Hadi, I'd like to call upon you to just share with us and give your analysis with what is happening, the current wave of repression, and why you think this repression is spreading across Africa, and it is spreading in a very coordinated manner. Thanks. I think you're still on mute. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much, Angela, for this, and to the whole team for putting this together. And thanks to our colleagues who have agreed to come on and have share with us what is happening in different parts of Africa. I think when we talk about Pan-African solidarity, especially within this political space, we are talking about, first of all, the realization that if something happens to an African anywhere, it affects every African everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the first thing that we have to internalize as African people. The second thing is to realize that any oppression of Africans anywhere, be it on the continent or in the diaspora, is linked to oppression of Africans anywhere else. Oppressors speak to themselves, they know one another, and in some cases, it looks like they are on the same WhatsApp group, sharing notes and experiences amongst themselves as to what to do to quell civic engagement and abuse people's human rights. With these few points of understanding, we may then be able to dive in and understand what is actually going on in different parts of the continent. There is an annual analysis that is done by Civicus that monitors civic space in different parts of the world. And that proves very, that analysis proves very, very important when we come to the discussion of what is happening, especially in Africa, regarding civic space and how we can show solidarity in that sense. So first of all, there are different categories of how we can look at this.
Hadi, you just muted yourself. Oh, thanks.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Yes. So there are different categories. We're talking about, for example, crackdown on free expression. We're talking about crackdown on free expression. We're talking about crackdown on human rights, people's human rights. We are talking about the targeting of those who wish to defend human rights in different parts of the continent. So they are cracking on the rights, and when some people rise to fight against that crackdown on general rights and freedom of expression and assembly, they are then targeted. So we look at it from that perspective, and mostly those who are mostly victims to this are journalists, activists, political operatives, whether they are partisan or non-partisan, as well as defenders of freedom. So that is the first category. And the second category has to do with the general sort of enforcement of a state of repression and fear, you know, in order to deter people from coming out. And we've seen this in many places. We've seen this in Kenya, which basically was can be said to have been the spark of what is come to be known as the Gen Z revolution. But maybe if something can be said about it, it can be said that it's not necessarily a Gen Z revolution, because I have seen some of the organizing ongoing, and I see that many different generations are doing this together. And even in the case of Kenya, you find that a lot of people have been doing on-ground organizing that created the background and the foundation for what we saw in 2024 June. But look at the state's reaction to what happened to the people's general, the state's reaction to the people's general disaffection to the finance bill, and their mobilization to oppose the provisions of that bill. The state basically, sent out the violent arm, the armed, section of the state to repress, and how the repression came in different ways. It came in looting, it came in the form of, even to the point of killing young people in Kenya. And we've seen that play out also in Madagascar. I'm happy that Lalaina is here. We've seen it play out. We've seen it play out recently in Tanzania. We've seen it play out in the Gambia. We've seen it play out in Nigeria. We've seen it play out in roughly different parts of the continent. So the use of violence to ensure that people do not oppose the misgovernance and misleadership of the African people, of African governments, is what is quite concerning to a lot of us who are watchers of Africa and who are lovers of Africa. But in most cases, the tactics that we've seen that have been used in some of these kinds of repressive tactics have been multifaceted. But of course, you can look at the abductions of people in Uganda. You can look at abductions of people in Kenya. You can look at abductions of people in, let's say, Tanzania and different parts. Then you see that there is a surveillance. There's an active surveillance that is going on, and that surveillance is powered by the current level of technologies that governments in Africa have acquired amongst themselves to monitor people's movements in terms of location, to monitor people's communication in terms of who they are talking to, and to use that as weapons of tracking people and abducting and torturing, and in some cases disappearing and killing them. Then the other level is the extent of lawfare that is weaponized, and by this I mean the creation of laws that purport to deal with terrorism, that are actually being weaponized to target activists and human rights defenders. We have seen such a law being proposed in Kenya. We have seen right now some people, protesters, who are under some kind of sham trial in Tanzania because of protests that they recently organized against the sham elections that were organized recently. So if you look at all of this together, you see that we have a wave of things to deal with, and these two things are mostly areas where copying amongst African governments is very rampant in terms of the lawfare, in terms of creating laws that seek to weaponize the legal environment against human rights defenders and against people who are wishing only to express themselves within the bounds of the Constitution. Within the bounds of the Constitution. Excuse me. So you know, governments are wont to copy how other governments are sort of enacting these laws, and this is something that poses a threat to all of us as Africans. The second thing is the technology, especially as we are in the age of AI. And some applications, for example, there's an Israeli spy software called Pegasus, which has been used on African soil to target activists and to target journalists, you know, in all of that. So this is a myriad of things that we have to deal with. Now, the purpose of Pan-African solidarity is to ensure that nobody is ever alone to deal with these things without support from fellow Africans. Because as I said earlier, oppression is linked one to the other, and they are talking to one another and they are copying from each other. Therefore, we also have to work together as Africans. And that is why Pan-African solidarity is really important. So in this discussion, in this convening, I'm really hoping that we can hear from the various experiences and come out with a framework by which we can set up the infrastructure for showing solidarity with each other as Africans as these things continue to happen. Then we have the other category of African countries that is currently battling conflict. Now, for example, Sudan is fresh on the radar, but the war is still ongoing. Innocent people are being killed, starved, and genocided. I'm happy that Saif is here. And of course we have a mobilization to show solidarity with Sudan. But it just tells you that what is happening in Sudan is not detached from whatever is happening in, let's say, Kenya or Uganda or what. You would find that a lot of the actors have the same interests and they are linked one to another. And therefore, we cannot talk about Pan-African solidarity without showing solidarity with other Africans whose nations are in conflict. We talk about, for example, DRC, and we have our colleagues, our comrade Kasongo is here, and he will be speaking to his own ordeal that he went through in the hands of the regime recently. Now, there is conflict ongoing, and the government is unable to marshal its forces to deal with the conflicts. However, those who raise their voices and say deal with the conflict are the ones that are rather being targeted. You know, they have the capacity then to target those people, such as Ilunga Kasongo. We have conflict ongoing in different parts of West Africa, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, and all of those places. These are all. I mean, we have conflicts happening in Mozambique. Madagascar, people rose up to oppose different the economic situation in which they were put in, with lack of basic services, and then the military suddenly, you know, rose up and usurped the power of the people. If you look at this, that is the same case that happened in Sudan. after the revolution. When the brave Sudanese rose up and the military usurped the power of the people, and that is that is what has brought all this conflict that we are having now. The same thing happened in Egypt when the revolution happened, and then the military swooped in to take the people's power. We are seeing all of that also in different parts of West Africa, Sahel, and all of those things. How do we ensure? I think the central question is, how do we ensure that we are connecting these issues and not only analyzing and bringing out patterns, but also creating the mechanisms and frameworks and infrastructure to make sure that we, as the people who are being oppressed, are showing solidarity with one another? Because the governments are not going to show solidarity with us. We, the people, must show solidarity with one another. And I'm very happy and I'm very proud of the pilot that Africans Rising did to show solidarity, for example, with our brothers and sisters displaced from Sudan, by asking African people to show solidarity by donating what they could, not necessarily in terms of finance, but people donated T-shirts, people donated boots, people donated and cooked food. And this is the kind of people-to-people solidarity we want to build. If anything happens to one African anywhere, it should be a concern to every other African everywhere. How do we make it happen? And that is the central question that I hope we can answer today. Thank you so much.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for that grounding that is so rich. From the conversation, from what we have heard so far, one thing is standing out is that our oppressors are coordinating themselves. They are coordinating and they are acting in a coordinated manner. And that is why we are seeing these patterns of repression that are so coordinated and looking like they have these discussions. So looking at the great analysis that has been shared by Hadi, we would like to hear from our speakers just to also understand the context. Of course, we have this general analysis that has been shared of what is happening, the wave of repression that is happening across Africa. But we understand that there are different contexts that are happening according to different countries and different regions. So, Lelaina, maybe you can share with us the forms of repressions that social movements and activists are currently experiencing in your country. We understand Madagascar is just coming from an uprising and a lot has happened. As though I think people on this call are very interested to find out what is happening in Madagascar. What is the state of social movements in Madagascar? Are activists safe? What form of repression are activists being subjected to? Thank you. Lelaina?
Yeah, thank you very much. So just to give a little background of what's happening in Madagascar and what is happening here now, to help us to understand the context. Well, what has been said by Hart in Madagascar practically happening in here, but we know that just 1 month ago we had a military takeover, and I think it's my first time to be in a public space like this to have this honest conversation, because I actually didn't feel safe even to tell like how do I need to call the military takeover. I want to be very honest in this call, because I've been already in the process of like the healing trauma after the I cannot call it coup because of that safety, while we know that the military took the power, So I think that's kind of moral violence is part of the repression that we are having as an activist, because back to what happened in Madagascar for the last 10 years, not 10 years, but more than 10 years, we had the same problem, no freedom of expression, no freedom of peaceful assembly. And what is happening is like, because of the rise of digital space, so it has been faked to have a freedom of expression through digital space, because of the business of fake accounts. So it looks like there is freedom of expression, but in the ground, we cannot, like, there are a lot of authorization, for example, that we didn't get if you want to have peaceful assembly. And also because there are a lot of, not only for activists, but for simple citizen. I don't really like to use the word simple citizen, but even just normal citizen cannot express themselves because there are a lot of people, ordinary people, who has been imprisoned. So it was not safe. So I don't want to talk about the safety of the activists, but I think also the government has worked on faking what is activism and civil society. Because for the past 10 years, what happened because of what I call it like the colonization of funding, there is NGOization of activism. A lot of NGOs come from, we don't know the funding from, but looks like they are activists, but they are like, I don't want to blame those people because some of them, they don't know, but we know that they are just faking the freedom of expression. I think that's a very moral violence or that help to the frustration, because for myself, for example, we've been organizing for the last 10 years. I've been working on NGO, but in our approach, we try to maintain our activism approach. And for that, we had a lot of fight with financial partners, because we had to challenge them, because a lot of them don't want to fund some activities because we are doing activism. And even if the beginning of this the movement in Madagascar, in September, when we had a communique that we did, and our organization was listed in the communique with the Gen Z movement. And then one of our funders told us, like, we have to think about your funding, because why are you just part of this movement? Because at that time, the movement was still seen, like what, as like something like a I mean, like, people didn't acknowledge the movement. So I think that's repression. That kind of repression is a very huge one in terms of funding and colonization of the space of civil society. But I would also add also, I mentioned already the business of digital space, because every time that we did our interpellation about repression in the civic space in Madagascar, our government responded as that you are free to express yourself on social media, just use social media. But we know that they have been using, not only the government also, but some politicians use a lot of fake accounts. So there are a lot of misinformation online. So I think that kind of repression is also like something very huge, because we, as Africa, maybe from the perspective of Madagascar, we are not ready to give civic education about the use of a digital space. So, I think we still need to have that kind of information. And back to the military takeover in Madagascar, as Artie mentioned, for me, frankly speaking, when we organized the manifestation, our hope was to have our president to resign from the people power, because we don't trust military takeover, because we know the histories that happened in Egypt, in Sudan. So like me, from my personal experience on that day, like 1 month ago, I literally, oh my goodness, I think this is still the result of civic repression, because I want to be honest, but we couldn't get enough people on the streets because of the fear and the repression. Because people, even the manifestation, the Gen Z movement also, people didn't believe on the people power that we can make it. So just once the military step in, people were like happy, like that fake freedom, like people were like happy, oh, we are finally free from the ancient regime, which is, for me, it's not safe at all. And right now, with what is happening in Madagascar, because now we have a military regime, like transitioning to the transition, I had myself the opportunity to meet with current president of the foundation, because you call him like this. And I think it was very sad to hear from him and his team that he doesn't trust activists because activists is politicized. So I think that kind of moral repression is still something that ongoing. Like, what is the difference? Like, because politics is actually, why should we make politics bad? I can't be like political activist. I can't be activist from civil society. But that kind of moral repression, I think that's something very dangerous. And the last thing that I want to mention is that I really want to mention from the perspective of borderless Africa, because I think it's very important. The decolonization of the African institutions in Africa. Like, for example, like we, Madagascar, we are in the southern part, so we have the SADC institution, but we don't trust, because and even the African Union, I'm happy that the African Rising has a high-level conversation on borderless Africa last week in African Union, because I think for me, when we talk about borderless Africa, it's also about the tools that they are using. I agree that the military takeover, it was a coup and everything, but the response from the Malagasy people when the first institution who blamed the African Union didn't recognize the movement, but just saw the coup. So I think that's kind of repression again. So I think it's like a self-stigma in our own institution, and we cannot rely in our own institution. And we know that to have really that freedom, we need to work on different parts, like different allies, the institutions, the government, the politicians. But to have that, to decolonize the tools, when the African Union example, for example, they are using the Peace Security Council to diagnose what is happening in each African country. They need to look at them, to be inclusive in their process, because someone like me, for example, I don't trust that institution. How can I trust the process to be back to the democracy process? And I think, from the case of Madagascar, it's not yet safe to say that we are working on the democracy process again, because democracy is not only about the election, but it's about the freedom of being yourself. And as I mentioned, actually, even myself, I don't even feel safe to speak out on my own feelings, not only from the government, but from the citizens in general, because of that misunderstanding of civic space. And we, of course, with the law to defend from activists and the human rights defenders, I think it's very important to have that law. But before that, we have to explain to our own people what is actually civic space and how do we trust at each other. I think I'm already going to the next step of how, but it's just a transition on how exactly we see the things from the perspective on, right now, with the confusion, the feelings, we don't trust at each other because we don't feel safe in our own space. I think that's very dangerous for activists. And the last thing that I would say is that psychological challenge, because if we don't take care of our hope and of our activism, people will look at us just just as tools for their own power. And I think that's very dangerous, because we know that having the Africa we want is taking time, but we all want to see it when we are alive. So we need to build that trust between us and to have that mutual understanding of civic space and moral repression. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Lelaina, for sharing that local context according to what has been happening in Madagascar. We've been reading about it, we've been hearing about it, but then it feels it's so good to just understand how the lived experiences coming from someone who's actually living in Madagascar. One thing that's just stand out is, oppressors use the tool of isolation. They isolate activists from allies, isolating activists also from each other and social movements from each other, because then that's when they build their power and their dominance. So Kasongo, thank you so much for joining us. We were just discussing the wave of repression that is going on around Africa. We heard from Hadi. He shared with us the general perspective of repression in Africa. And now we are just allowing our speakers to just also share their lived experiences. So with that said, I will ask Kasongo to just introduce himself, but then also share your lived experiences that you have experienced as an activist living in the DRC. Looking at the special context of the DRC, it's a conflict-torn country, and also now there's a lot of repression that is happening with activists in the DRC. So maybe you can also just share with us your lived experiences. What is happening with activists? What is the state of activism in the DRC? Thanks.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Je salue tous les camarades présents ici à la session d'aujourd'hui. Je remercie toute l'équipe pour cette session parce que c'est vraiment important et il était vraiment impérieux qu'aujourd'hui qu'on en discute parce que quand même il faut comprendre que il y a actuellement une forte restriction de l'espace collectif partout en Afrique. Alors, en République démocratique du Congo, il faut comprendre que nous déjà, c'est depuis l'ancien régime qu'il y a eu une forte restriction de l'espace collectif qui était caractérisée par l'ensemble de la crispation de l'activité, donc la crispation de l'atmosphère sociopolitique qui se caractérisait par les arrestations des activistes, par la mise en exil forcée des acteurs de l'opposition et des activistes, par tout ce qui est arrestation arbitraire. Cependant, avec le nouveau régime en 2019, il y a eu un semblant, n'est-ce pas, d'ouverture de l'espace collectif, mais cependant, depuis 2023, avec cette montée en puissance de la volonté du pouvoir du président Tshisekedi de se maintenir au pouvoir et de briguer, n'est-ce pas, un troisième mandat en voulant changer la constitution, là maintenant, il y a eu cette naissance-là, ou bien cette montée en puissance de la restriction de l'espace collectif. Donc, vous allez comprendre qu'aujourd'hui, à Kinshasa ou bien en province, si les activistes veulent tenir des actions de terrain, ils sont soit mis, n'est-ce pas, en mal par les milices du parti au pouvoir, soit ils sont mis à mal, n'est-ce pas, par la police, donc la puissance publique de notre pays. Et vous allez comprendre qu'au niveau de tout ce qui est liberté d'association, liberté d'expression, il y a une grande intolérance et il y a ces violations de ce droit-là. Notre pays est dans un contexte très compliqué parce que tout le monde sait que nous vivons une grande guerre qui a aujourd'hui 30 ans. On nous a imposé la guerre par la communauté, bon, plusieurs pays occidentaux, plusieurs pays de la région, mais il y a aussi des groupes armés qui sont là, mais il y a aussi, n'est-ce pas, des acteurs locaux plutôt, qui sont à l'intérieur. Et ça fait assez que l'activiste a un grand rôle à jouer, n'est-ce pas, de un, en promouvant, en faisant la promotion plutôt, n'est-ce pas, de la non-violence par les règlements de conflit, par exemple. Deuxièmement, en jouant l'intermédiaire entre la population et les dirigés, et les dirigeants plutôt. Mais, comme par hasard, même l'État en question n'arrive pas à comprendre le rôle de l'activiste et met en mal l'ensemble de son exercice. Vous allez comprendre que depuis l'arrivée de Tshisekedi, il y a des activistes qui ont été emprisonnés, il y a des activistes qui ont été assassinés, qui ont rencontré, n'est-ce pas, la mort donc, sur terrain, en pleine activité. Et personnellement, maintenant, j'ai été arrêté par la présidence de la République. Donc, ils ont créé toute une commission à la présidence qui s'appelle le Conseil national de cyberdéfense. C'est un conseil donc qui est comme la police de la présidence. Elle entre dans tous les domaines. Elle n'a pas de restrictions, elle n'a pas de limites, elle entre partout. Et c'était par expérience, c'était le 27 août que je devrais tenir une réunion avec certains camarades. On a été arrêtés en plein centre-ville de Kinshasa par ces services en question, mais accompagnés et de l'armée, accompagnés et de la politique et de la police. Donc, ils étaient au moins plus de 27 éléments de la puissance publique qui sont venus arrêter 3 personnes. Et il s'est fait à ce que quand nous sommes partis là-bas, quand ils nous ont amenés dans leurs locaux, après le locaux, ils nous ont directement acheminés dans des lieux que personne ne connaissait. Ni TT, la mobilisation des activistes au niveau interne et externe, on n'allait jamais pu être retrouvés. Parce que non seulement on n'a pas été auditionné, mais on a rencontré certaines personnes, certains Congolais dedans, ok, qui ont fait plus d'une année, plus de 6 mois sans être auditionnés et sans être visités même par leur famille. Et on y a fait 14 jours. On a été libéré le 10 septembre 2025, donc de cette année. On a fait 14 jours. Et après les 14 jours en question, jusqu'à maintenant, on est encore victime, n'est-ce pas, de cette répression-là. Ils sont en train de nous menacer au téléphone. Par exemple, notre mouvement Bis au Peuple, on allait faire une activité pour dénoncer l'insécurité qui bat le plein à Kinshasa, dans la capitale. Mais on a été contacté, on a été appelé par appel anonyme parce qu'ils nous ont fait signer un document sur honneur disant qu'on ne peut pas exercer l'activisme. Vous comprenez? Et on a été appelé, on était dans l'obligation de surseoir cela et chercher d'autres mouvements, d'autres camarades pour que ces derniers essayent de faire quoi, n'est-ce pas? De faire cette activité-là à notre place pour qu'on contourne cette menace. Et jusque-là, nous vivons en clandestinité parce qu'ils sont en train de visiter nos habitations. Et ça fait à ce que ça crée une nécessité d'aller à l'extérieur du pays. Donc, ils sont en train de nous pousser indirectement d'aller à l'extérieur du pays, chose que nous, on ne peut pas faire. Nous, on s'est décidé de rester au Congo parce que si tous les activistes quittent l'État, quittent le pays, il n'y aura plus de participation citoyenne. Voilà pourquoi nous sommes là. Donc, la situation, elle est catastrophique en République démocratique du Congo. L'espace collectif, il est restreint totalement. Il y a violation de tout ce qui est liberté d'expression et il y a, n'est-ce pas, violation des libertés d'association. Mais cependant, ici, je profite parce qu'aujourd'hui, l'ensemble des Africains, l'ensemble des activistes, l'ensemble des militants de l'Afrique sont en train de nous entendre. Je les remercie parce que c'est grâce à cette mobilisation-là qu'on a été libérés. Mais cependant, il faut qu'on aille outre, donc au-delà de la mobilisation avec les hashtags, qu'on aille au-delà, n'est-ce pas, avec les publications Internet. Parce que les vies des gens en dépendent. On ne fait l'activisme que lorsqu'on est vivant. Mais si on tue un activiste, c'est difficile dans cette jeunesse-là qui est distraite, n'est-ce pas, qui est des activistes, des gens qui peuvent dire la vérité, n'est-ce pas, aux dirigeants. Donc, c'est-à-dire, il faut que Africans Rising, d'autres structures, avec d'autres partenaires, qu'on essaye de mettre en place une brigade, une stratégie d'intervention rapide en cas d'arrestation. Non seulement on fait du communiqué, mais les communiqués peuvent être suivis avec des actions de terrain afin qu'on libère les gens pour qu'ils ne soient pas, n'est-ce pas, qu'ils ne tombent pas dans les pièges, n'est-ce pas, des États africains. Vous comprenez? Et aussi, je remercie encore African Rising avec l'accompagnement, n'est-ce pas, des activistes qui ont été arrêtés. C'est très bien, il faut toujours accompagner, n'est-ce pas, les camarades parce qu'ils vivent des situations très compliquées. Donc, il faut qu'il y ait un suivi permanent dans ces gens-là. Alors, moi, ce que je peux proposer, c'est au-delà de la mobilisation virtuelle, que African Rising, que ces organisations partenaires essayent de mettre en place des structures d'intervention rapide en cas d'arrestation pour donner la vraie information, n'est-ce pas, de ce qui se passe au terrain et aussi agir. Parce qu'en cas d'arrestation, comme nous, quand on était arrêtés, il y a eu d'autres activistes africains et activistes congolais qui sont des mèches avec le pouvoir en place et qui donnent la mauvaise information à d'autres partenaires africains. Comprenez un peu la situation. Donc, c'est très complexe en République démocratique du Congo, mais on fait le tout pour, n'est-ce pas, rester, n'est-ce pas, au pays et essayer un peu, n'est-ce pas, d'exercer notre participation citoyenne. Donc, merci pour l'invitation à cette session et désolé encore pour les retards parce qu'il y a un sérieux problème de connexion là où je me retrouve en ces moments parce que je suis en province. Il y a beaucoup de problèmes d'Internet. Mais cependant, je reste disposé s'il y aura des camarades qui auront besoin d'explications en profondeur ou bien des questions ou bien des préoccupations. Merci.
Merci, Kasongo. Thank you so much for sharing your lived experiences. It is indeed very sad to hear of what you go through just because of standing up for the rights of your people and your country. I will go to Mohammed. Mohammed and Kasongo, you share a very similar context, looking at how Sudan is also currently has been going through a war-torn country, and then now we're trying to see what looking at someone coming from Sudan, what is the state of activism, social movements in Sudan with escalating conflicts that is there. We've seen the conflict has highly escalated, and now we are seeing do activists have voices? What type of repression are activists and social movements going through in Sudan? Mohammed, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you once again for having me. Thank you for the panel, and thank you for all the participants who are with us today from different parts of the African continent. Just a quick background on the history of Sudan and the political crisis. Now we're almost coming up to 70 years since independence in 1956, in the year 1956. And Sudan since then, just to put it in context, more than 58 years of political military rule, dictatorships, and only about 11 years of civilian political governments. So that tells the story in itself that Sudan, since the dawn of independence, it has really had short democracies and long-term lived dictatorships. Also, civil wars broke out since 1955, a year before independence in the South Sudan. Civil wars that ended up in the year 2011 with the separation of the large parts of the country, that's the Republic of South Sudan today, and later escalated into also talk about, I'll particularly pay attention into the last part of the 30 years that was ruled by Omar al-Bashir, because I think that plays a big role in what explains a big role what's happening today in Sudan, in the war that's happening. We know that in the year 1989 there was a military coup by Omar al-Bashir, a general in the military who took over power with an iron fist, and that lasted 30 years until the People's Revolution came in 2019 or late 2018, and that toppled his regime. Also, that period, I think activists played a big role in the mobilization of people in different cities in Sudan, and it played a huge role. Actually, I would remember actually in the beginning of the movement in 2019 in the revolution, Bashir famously said that activists and people would not remove me with merely posts on Facebook. So they thought that it was not going to be a big thing. But the movement from Facebook went on the ground, and it really it echoed through the whole country, and it led to the change of the regime. So then there was a period of euphoria, excitement about the future of the country, that a long-term oppressive regime has gone or been thrown. And the civilians were looking forward to the future of a politically civilian-led government. And there was long-term negotiations, 2-3 months between civilians and the military that took over. And they came up to conclusion that they would be sharing a power sharing agreement in a period of transition of about 3 years, and then that would lead to civilian political led rule, and the military would be out of politics. For 2 years, from 2019 to 2021, until October, there was a power sharing agreement, but unfortunately on October 25th, 2021, again, the military took over and actually echo what Liliana said. You cannot trust the military, and that's maybe what our civilian leaders did not understand. It was from the time of the revolution, they should have been total control of the government, but they agreed a compromise, and that compromise costed the country dearly right now. So in the year 2023, the two ruling, the president of the country, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and his vice president, General Hemeti, had a power dispute. There was a lot of effort being also made by civilian, uh, whether it's political parties, civil society, trying to bring the two together so that they could avoid the confrontation, the armed confrontation. And unfortunately, all these efforts were crushed down by the war that took place in 15th April 2023. Now, this war has been different because wars previously in Sudan, it was always on the margins. It was in the southern parts of the country, in Darfur, in the western regions of the country, in the eastern part. It was never in the center. There was no war that has erupted from the capital city, Khartoum. And all of you could see the devastation that's happened now in the capital city, Khartoum, and different regions of the country. So that just shows it's accumulated years of failure of military rule and oppressive regimes and hostile political structures towards civilians that resulted in all this chaos. Now, amidst all that, there has been efforts by political activists, civil society, to firefight what is happening right now in terms of raising awareness about the ongoing conflict, the atrocities, the genocides happening in Darfur region, in Kordofan, and all these parts of the country that are burning down as a result of the ongoing war. But unfortunately, again, today, as the country is split in terms of control between the Sudanese government and the rapid support forces, there's been a big issue of activist protection or oppression that's happening in the country. Activists under the control of the rapid support forces see the rapid support forces see them as traitors, potential traitors, or conspirators against them. And the same goes in the case of the Sudanese armed forces, in the areas of Sudanese armed forces. There is a lot of happening, also a lot of arrests, questionings. There's been kidnappings in both areas of control, the RSF and the Sudanese armed forces. So they have been facing a lot of hostilities in terms of their campaigns. So most of them have been forced to exile, unfortunately. And some of them right now, I've met with a lot of them here in Kenya. Some have gone to Uganda, some have gone to Ethiopia in the regional countries neighboring Sudan. And they have found safety in terms of being able to speak more openly on what's happening on ground. And so there's been a lot of efforts, there's been a lot of workshops being done here with different political youth groups, Sudanese youth groups, to raise awareness and also to take more action, because I certainly believe that we believe that those who are in Sudan right now, activists or anything, there's nothing they can do, whether under the rapid support forces controlled areas or government controlled areas. They are completely oppressed. So there is a lot of burden that's weighing heavy on us, but we have to take it with responsibility because our people are suffering on the ground, the Sudanese people suffering because of this devastating civil war. So as a result, we've come up, as I said, with several initiatives happening right now between the different groups. We are working towards consolidating these efforts. Now, the issues also being faced by Sudanese youth in the diaspora here in different parts of the region is that we also have some people who fled to countries like Egypt, some who fled to Eritrea, some who fled to different parts of neighboring Sudan. But there's another thing that I have to mention. There are some countries in the region neighboring Sudan that also have no interest in ending the war or have interest directly with either of the warring factions in Sudan. So you cannot go also there in a country there and speak also your mind or what's happening. You're faced also with a lot of oppression. You're either imprisoned or tortured or kidnapped, So you also have to be very careful when you speak about what's happening in your own home country. And that's another challenge. And that also brings me to the point. Today, I cannot expect Sudan to be a democratic country when almost all the 7 countries that we're bordered by, there is no democracies in them. So that calls for collective action. When you look at the like in Egypt, for example, in Eritrea, in Chad, I've seen people here from Chad, from different parts of neighboring my country, bordering my country. We are all facing the same problem. South Sudan, same issue, dictatorship. So we cannot, there is no miracle that can be worked. You just wait for something to happen. We need collective action and on the ground. We need on the ground work, because these webinars will help us a lot in getting the ideas. And then we need to take action. We need an action plan so that these efforts are more effective and can be implemented to help bring about democratic reforms in our own countries. I'm sure people in Chad want democracy, people in South Sudan, people in Egypt, Eritrea, same thing. We just need to be more collective and in our efforts to bring the change we need in Africa as a continent. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. One thing is clear after listening to all the activists share their personal lived experiences, that oppressors are coordinating, oppressors are evolving, they're evolving their strategies, they're now using social media, and they're also using so many allies whilst they're isolating activists so that you are alone and your actions are not amplified. So looking at everything that we have shared, the lived experiences that we have heard, what then can we do? What then can we do? What are some of the missing gaps? What is missing for activists to have cross-border solidarity, for social movements to have cross-border solidarity in addressing this issue? I like something that Mohammed said, that, during what was happening in Sudan, we saw actions moving from Facebook and now coming to the ground. So now what is happening now is that we have seen a few people, few countries showing solidarity online, but now we need actual action. So what is it that, first of all, I'd like us to address this question: what is missing in building cross-border solidarity? And what is it that we can do to strengthen? What are some of the actions that we can implement as activists collectively for us to strengthen Pan-African solidarity for social movements and activists and human rights defenders across Africa? So we can, I will ask Asongo, maybe you can respond first.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Moi, je pense que ce qu'il faut, il faut faire une initiative coordonnée. Donc, c'est-à-dire avec la grande plateforme qui nous réunit maintenant là, qu'on essaie de voir toutes les organisations représentées dans chaque pays dans lequel nous sommes installés, qu'on crée dans chaque pays au moins une brigade d'intervention rapide, n'est-ce pas, en cas d'arrestation. Ça, c'est la première des choses. Parce que si on a l'intervention et qu'on a la véracité, n'est-ce pas, de cette information-là, cette brigade-là peut avoir la possibilité d'engager directement d'abord un assaut dans le lieu de détention, là où est détenu, n'est-ce pas, un camarade. Mais aussi cela en accompagnant aussi avec le corps, je peux appeler ça corps judiciaire, donc c'est-à-dire un collectif d'avocats qui peut être aussi issu, qui peut être aussi membre, n'est-ce pas, de cette brigade-là. Ça, c'est la première des choses. La deuxième des choses qu'il faut faire, c'est aussi proposer à ce qui est, n'est-ce pas, suivi en cas de libération. En cas de libération, n'est-ce pas, des activistes qui ont été détenus ou bien qui sont encore détenus. Il faut qu'il y ait suivi. Parce que le fait d'être arrêté ou bien d'être détenu, ça a beaucoup de conséquences au niveau de la société. Ça, le premier point, c'est l'exclusion sociale qui existe directement dans la société et tout le monde sait. Par exemple, dans le cas des gens qui sont arrêtés par la présidence, tout le monde, même au quartier, sait que celui-ci, c'est un mauvais élément, il peut nous apporter un problème. Donc, il faut qu'il y ait suivi pour que la personne ne soit pas isolée et tomber encore dans les pièges, n'est-ce pas, du dictateur ou bien des régimes, n'est-ce pas, dictatoriaux. La troisième des choses, c'est aussi avoir comment faire des suivis, donc mettre pas seulement suivi, mais faire un accompagnement psychologique. C'est très important. C'est très important. Parce que la torture que subissent les activistes, s'ils n'ont pas des nerfs solides, beaucoup vont laisser l'activisme. C'est une façon où l'État vous prend, il vous fait des choses pour que vous ayez le dégoût de l'activisme total. Or, avec les réalités africaines qu'on sait, s'il n'y a pas une structure qui peut faire ces suivis-là, qui peut, n'est-ce pas, accompagner, n'est-ce pas, certains activistes pour faire ces suivis-là, il y aura, n'est-ce pas, diminution de l'engagement. Et la troisième des choses, bien sûr, c'est assister ceux qui sont encore, n'est-ce pas, détenus, en créant, n'est-ce pas, cet lien-là entre ceux qui sont dehors et ceux qui sont dedans. Parce que je suis, donc ça, c'est une exclusivité que je donne, je suis en train d'écrire un petit bouquin sur mon arrestation et sur les attentes que j'avais sur les structures partenaires ou bien sur l'ensemble de mes camarades activistes. Et je dois aussi expliquer dans ces mêmes livres le rôle que doit, ou bien la position que doit avoir un activiste lorsqu'il est arrêté, qu'est-ce qu'il doit faire et qu'est-ce qui ne doit pas être fait et qui ne doit pas, n'est-ce pas, faire. Donc, je laisse aussi la parole à d'autres camarades pour qu'ils nous donnent aussi leur point de vue. Merci.
Thank you so much, Kasongo. I think it would be good to have access to that book once you finish publishing it. One thing is for sure is that, someone was saying that activists are always looking out for other people. They're always defending other people, but who looks out for them? So issues of mental well-being is very, very critical in the well-being and solidarity of activists. I will ask Lelaina, maybe do you want to have some contribution around that question?
Yeah, I think this is something that I always raised, and I always engage with Africans Rising from my perspective to have more storytelling about the lived experience, this kind of space. Because, like, again, from my lived experience, for example, when things happen in Madagascar, I mean, I don't know if it's culturally, education, but, like, there are some people who can tell the story. I mean, I don't know if journalists or storytellers and people are in the ground. Like for me, for example, like at some point, I want like to tell what is happening in Madagascar from our perspective, because we know already what of the African Union would say, but I think we didn't have that enough space to tell our stories. I mean, like from my auto feedback as well, I even couldn't write, so. I mean, I think that's a solidarity that we can do, like, because I can share my stories, other comrade can write about it, any podcast, like, and without the language barrier, because from the French-speaking perspective, language is always a challenge, for example, because, like when artists said, for example, like when something happened in Sudan, me in Madagascar should be concerned about this. I think there is that language barrier that we already challenge other Africans present. So I think we need more space of this. But not only at the regional space, but also at the global space, to know what is happening in the continent, not only from the issues, but how the activists are challenging the obstacles, the positive things that are happening. And the second one is, I briefly talked about it already, but I think in the Borderless Africa campaign, we need to push more to the African Union and the regional institution about them to hear from the ground, not only from the state and the government, because I think it's always too late for them to listen to the activists. So I think we need to push that further, like that for the institution needs to understand from the ground. That's kind of solidarity we need to talk. And the last one is, I would to second about the psychological support. I think we need to start. We also need funding for that, because I remember I had the opportunity to to be part of activist in residency with African Swazin. At that point, it was like, like a training, but also a reflecting moment and relaxing moment for me, because we are not a guru. So at some point we need to have that space of resting. So I think I don't know, we maybe like a very concrete action for me, like we have to have more funding of that. Like if we need to, not only when something happens of arrestation, but if there is a space for activists to rest and reflect, because it's very heavy to work in this burden. So I think to have that more space of reflecting and relate, to fill our own cap so we can continue, because from there, I don't know, I mean, I think it's not only in Madagascar, but it's very tiny to have young people not to live in the continent. And I think it's very dangerous, because a lot of narrative are saying that there is no hope, and we need to understand that hope. And for me to understand that hope is that psychological support, and to have really with them, like we actually have the right to take a break and to not think of, like that financial stability. Because for me, for example, at some point I was like thinking, like, I wish I can do that sabbatical year so I can give back my energy. So, like after my experience, I think that's very important to have this kind of space in African continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. Just before you respond, as you know, we are working towards putting together a Pan-African Solidarity Action Network, a network that will be able to respond to solidarity issues of social movements and activists across Africa. So as you are responding to this question of cross-border solidarity, how then do you see such a network functioning in practice? What do you think the network can put in place, and what are the urgent matters that you think the network should address? I think even as you're responding to the first question, maybe you can also put this. I'll allow the other the speakers to also just share. If you feel free, you can share as we move on in the conversation. Thank you, Mohammed. You can go on.
Well, thank you. I would like to echo what my comrades said before. The issue is first issue that's facing the activists in Africa is there is no safety. There is nobody to protect them. We need a safe place where to communicate our message to the people to the African people. How do we get that? I think that we cannot get it by maybe just hashtags or social media campaigns. That will help towards that course, but we need more action, more pressure. I think organizations like the African Union need to have strong legal action plans, laws for protecting activists within the African continent. I think because if that's done, I think there will be serious diplomatic pressure on any government within this continent, within Africa, if it arrests an activist based on political opinion or based on a civil society group, based on being part of a civil society group or something like that. I think that will be very good, because that will put them under the microscope. There is no putting these governments under the microscope right now. They're operating freely as much as they want. Nobody is there is no judgment for them. There's nothing like that. I think that's the first thing that could help in that sense. I think second, on the issue of the solidarity, on the African solidarity, I think we also need to come up with a framework that has principles that's agreed upon by different youth groups or different activist groups within Africa, that helps in mobilization, in terms of mobilization and pressuring also again governments within Africa to help protect the civilians. I think what people normally miss out is that the people always win. It's not the people have the power always, It's just how do we mobilize them? And the mobilization can come out in terms of advocacy groups. It can come out in terms of supportive actions and things like that. So I think that will go a long way, and I think we need to establish it as soon as possible so that it's actually on the ground. We need a sample of it, a sample. Then the sample will help us understand, or a prototype. Then will help us understand where we could, where we have failed, where we have succeeded, so that it's not going to happen overnight. I think this thing it's a long process, but when we start immediately, I think we'll be able to understand, for example, between 2025 to 2026, what happened, where did we go wrong, where did we go right. I think that one will continue that way until we achieve our plan.
Thank you so much, Mohammed, for that contribution. So I'd just like to remind everyone, if you have a question, you can kindly just type your question so that we can be able to see it. You can also make your contribution in the chat so that we can also be able to see it, and I'll allow the speakers to also just respond maybe 2 or 3 questions once we see those questions. I would like to ask, how did you have any contribution looking at how do we strengthen a Pan-African Solidarity Action Network? Do you want to contribute something? I just realized that you've been too quiet.
No, I prefer to listen more to comrades. So yes, I'll give my time to more participants to weigh in.
Great. No, thank you so much. Lelaina and Kasongo, we were talking about what would a functional Pan-African Solidarity Network look like? What are some of the agent things do you think this network should be able to address? Maybe just in less than a minute, we can have those contributions, because I've seen we have run out of time, so that we can also just respond to a few questions and then we can have our closing. Thank you. You can just feel free to unmute yourself and contribute. Kasongo, Lelaina, I'll call upon Kasongo.
Oui, j'ai pas bien compris la question. La question c'est, le réseau va faire quoi? J'ai pas bien compris.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. So I was saying we are in the process of establishing a Pan-African Solidarity Action Network. So looking at the contribution that came from Mohammed, what are some of the agent things that this network should address? And what are some of the strategies do you think that this network should engage in order for it to be successful and to have impact?
Bon, moi je pense que personnellement, le réseau devrait faire en premier lieu, n'est-ce pas, booster l'engagement des camarades qui sont dans la même région que là où est activiste, qui est soit arrêté, soit en danger. Donc, booster d'abord leur engagement. Parce qu'il y a des activistes, quand l'autre est dans un problème, ils pensent que soit c'est faux, soit ils sont un peu mous, soit ils attendent que les jours passent. Alors qu'ils ne comprennent pas que plus le jour passe, plus l'autre est là et en danger et on risque de le perdre. Donc, le réseau là doit d'abord booster en premier. Deuxièmement, fédérer l'ensemble des activistes sur un même objectif qui est d'abord soit la libération, soit la relaxation de l'activiste, soit, n'est-ce pas, un accompagnement, donc un suivi de son dossier. Ça doit être le premier rôle de ces réseaux-là. Le deuxième rôle de ces réseaux-là, c'est faire grande promotion, la grande promotion de la situation, n'est-ce pas, des activistes qui sont en danger ou bien qui sont arrêtés. Parce que vous allez comprendre, même quand on parle de l'Union africaine, même quand on parle d'autres organismes partenaires, même quand on parle des partenaires africains ou bien des partenaires internes, lorsqu'il y a déficit de l'information, c'est compliqué. Par exemple, si un activiste est arrêté, les médias qui sont contrôlés par le gouvernement ne peuvent pas publier cela. Donc, il faut rendre d'abord cette information-là, la partager de manière instantanée dans tous les réseaux, que toute personne qui milite pour le droit de l'homme, quel que soit son bord politique, qu'il comprenne d'abord que non, il y a un activiste, qu'ils soient informés qu'il y a un activiste qui est en danger. La troisième des choses, c'est cet accompagnement-là dont on veut. Cet accompagnement-là qui peut être psychologique et juridique. Donc, c'est un accompagnement technique, il faut le dire, un accompagnement technique et financier dans ce sens-là. Parce que quand on parle de soins psychologiques, On sait qu'il y a des docteurs en place et il y a plus donc les sessions, comme moi par exemple, j'ai fait au moins 3 sessions avec un psychologue. Et les psychiatres me demandaient 100 dollars par séance. Vous comprenez? Donc, il faut qu'il y ait aussi cet accompagnement-là pour que les activistes soient en mesure aussi d'avoir cet accompagnement psychologique. Et le quatrième rôle du réseau serait aussi d'archiver les cas-là. On archive les cas d'arrestation, les cas de violation des droits de l'homme, afin de faire un plaidoyer au niveau des institutions politiques régionales, nationales ou bien régionaux, nationaux ou bien intercontinentaux, pour qu'il y ait la protection directe des activistes, pour que les activistes soient considérés comme des acteurs qui favorisent aussi, n'est-ce pas, un élan en termes de développement par le contrôle qu'ils font, le contrôle citoyen et la participation citoyenne. Ce ne sont pas des ennemis d'un régime, mais plutôt ce sont des gens qui ont la possibilité que lorsque ça va, ils disent que ça va, et quand ça ne va pas, ils critiquent cela. Moi, je pense que sur les 4 volets, personnellement, ça peut être bien, et je pense que les camarades peuvent, n'est-ce pas, contribuer aussi plus que ça. Merci.
Merci. Maintenant, je voudrais parler en français et juste ajouter un point par rapport à ce qui a été dit par le camarade Kansongo. Je pense que j'ai parlé lors de ma première intervention par rapport à l'espace digital. Et je pense que nous pouvons donc travailler davantage sur cet espace digital parce qu'il y a trop de désinformations sur cet espace digital.
Absolument.
Donc, je pense que à travers ce réseau, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, à travers nos histoires, peut-être des hashtags, peut-être de faire un mapping des gens qui devraient être des références quand on cherche des news, des nouvelles particulières par rapport à ce qui se passe à un pays. Je pense que ça, c'est quelque chose que nous devons travailler, nous devons faire parce que, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, l'espace digital, ça devient un business. C'est ce qui se passe à Madagascar. Il y a beaucoup de jeunes qui travaillent pour des fins comptes, donc ça devenait une source d'emploi et nous devons vraiment travailler donc tout pour cette nouvelle répression de misinformation et de désinformation parce que nous savons que la génération actuelle, nous ne pouvons plus échapper de cet espace digital mais il y a trop de désinformation sur cet espace digital. C'est ce que je voudrais ajouter.
Oui, moi je pense que c'est bien. C'est ce que moi aussi j'ai dit, dans le fait de faire large diffusion, n'est-ce pas, des vraies informations, mais aussi commencer à archiver afin de permettre qu'il y ait, n'est-ce pas, un bon plaidoyer à ce niveau-là. Donc, je suis totalement d'accord au niveau digital. Ça, c'est vraiment important et je pense que je l'ai aussi développé. Donc, je suis totalement d'accord avec vous. Merci.
Thank you so much for those rich contributions. So happy to be here today and be able to just hear the rich perspectives that are coming in from our different comrades representing different countries. Before we get some, before we go to the next segment, I would just like to read some comments. There's a contribution that came from Yevis, and they're saying, okay, I'll move on to say, what their contribution is that we need to set up a team of lawyers who will intervene every time if one of us is stopped. We must also list or either list all the movements that are associated with Africans Rising or movements that also want to join the structure. Finally, it is important to have a monthly meeting to find out the evolution of the network on the ground. Thank you so much, Ivas, for those contributions. And I believe everything that is coming from this rich conversation will be able to also guide and also help us, even as we are facilitating for a space to develop the Pan-African Solidarity Action Network. So with those contributions that were made, rich contributions, very important contributions, looking at how do we transform, how do we build the Africa that we want, by strengthening our response to solidarity actions. I would like to thank everyone who was here today, the speakers, the comrades. Thank you so much for those rich conversations. And also, Kasongo, we are looking forward to your book, which we are hoping we will be able to share, and then we can just also have more context on your experiences. Hadi, do you want to say something?
Don't you think it's
Merci
don't you think
beaucoup.
it's right if as some participants want to say a thing or two, maybe you can just give 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it wouldn't be fair to just close without hearing from yeah.
Okay. I was getting to that. So before we actually close, if we have any more contributions, please feel free to type in the chat. I understand most of us are not able to unmute ourselves, but we can just type in the chat so that we can contribute. Unless, Maurice, is it possible for participants to also unmute themselves?
I mean, they can raise their hand, and
Okay.
I can allow them to talk.
Great. So if you have a contribution, kindly raise your hand, and then we'll be able to just share your contribution. Please feel free. Okay. Okay. So I have not. Okay, Kasongo has something to contribute whilst we're waiting for the participants. Kasongo, please go on. You can unmute yourself. Thanks.
Ok, d'accord, merci. Ça, c'est vraiment un message que je voulais lancer aux camarades africains et à mes frères et sœurs qui sont là dans la lutte. Donc, chers frères et sœurs, il faut comprendre que c'est pas pour rien qu'on se retrouve aujourd'hui dans cette discussion. C'est pas pour rien qu'aujourd'hui nous sommes dans la lutte. On est dans la lutte parce qu'on a compris quelle était notre mission de naissance en naissant en Afrique et en naissant en ces moments. Oui, il y a les dangers dans cette route ici. Oui, il y a les arrestations. Oui, il y a les mises en exil forcées. Il y a des détentions, des tortures et autres. Mais il ne faut pas oublier que tout ça annonce, n'est-ce pas, la naissance d'une nouvelle ère sur l'Afrique. Oui, il faut tenir debout. Ne nous laissons pas intimider par ces genres de dictateurs qui veulent nous envoyer à l'extérieur du continent pour qu'ils restent ici avec ceux qui ne sont pas engagés, pour qu'ils les dribblent, pour qu'ils les manipulent. Acceptons cela. Peut-être nous sommes venus en Afrique et au monde que pour ça. Donc restons courageux, restons solidaires et faisons en sorte qu'on soit déterminés pour, n'est-ce pas, atteindre l'objectif de la mission pour laquelle, n'est-ce pas, nous sommes engagés pour l'ensemble de notre pays, pour l'ensemble du panafricanisme et pour la question identitaire pour laquelle nous militons. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Kasongo. We really appreciate. Yves, I saw your hand was up. You can go on and just share your contribution. Thank you.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Je ne sais pas si je peux parler en anglais ou bien en français, mais je m'aimerais parler en français pour que je sois un peu clair. Ok, Kasongo Ilunga Atubalae, moi je m'aimerais juste ajouter quelque chose de très important parce que les activistes ou bien les panafricanismes sont exposés. Si nous pouvons mettre en place une équipe des avocats qui vont intervenir lorsqu'un activiste est arrêté, ils peuvent intervenir rapidement. Et deuxième point, j'aimerais aussi, si ça sera facile, que nous organisons les réunions mensuelles. Chaque fin du mois, nous organisons des réunions pour essayer un peu de savoir comment les activistes ou bien le panafricanisme évoluent dans leur pays. Donc, c'est un peu ça. C'est les deux points que je peux ajouter présentement.
Thank you so much for that contribution. Annette, your hand is up. Please go on. Annette, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, clearly.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for the beautiful contributions. I just want to say I have picked out two very important things from this discussion. The first is that our leaders, they work in a coordinated manner, which permits them to succeed in their fight to oppress activists and the population in general. Meanwhile, the activists, they work somehow in isolation, and which makes their fight not to be so much coordinated. And based on this, I really appreciated what Nalaina said about the borderless Africa, because I see that if the activists are isolated, it means that the activists in a particular country can only operate in their country. But if they had the possibility of maybe moving to other countries to support activists there, then I think their fights can be more effective. So I think this is a direct call to Africans Rising, and especially those leading the Borderless Africa campaign, to see and understand that we still have much work to do, and that there are other aspects that concerns the Borderless Africa campaign, and not just what we have maybe been talking so far up till now. So I'm wishing and hoping that in the future, when we are having such meetings like this, I think it will be good for those running the Borderless Africa campaign to be present, so that they can pick out some information and know how they can draw up their plan of action. So it's just a contribution I'm trying to make, and I wanted to point out this because I felt like it really touched me, because if activists are coordinated like the African leaders, then I believe their fight and their mission can be very much successful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anate, for that contribution. Before we go into the closing remarks, I would just like to read some of the contributions that some comrades have made. Peter says, I think we should have more monthly meetings, probably monthly, to keep updated on what is happening on the continent and not only your country. There's also another contribution from Benga. He says, Africa is our continent, then let's stay Black by fighting for it. I suggest that we settle on a monthly meeting. Thank you so much, comrades, for those wonderful contributions. I'll now call upon our lead for our department, which is Pan-African Solidarity and Movement Building, Pan-African Solidarity Unit, Prince, to just give some closing statements before Hadi concludes and closes for us. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Angela. And then I also want to say a very big thank you to our speakers for coming to share their experiences with us from so many years of activism and showing solidarity to other Africans across the continent. For me, I think I've learned a lot looking at the works that they've done over the years in their respective countries. Also gives us the need that we have to come together as Africans. We can't continue doing things individually in our various countries, but we need to come together and show solidarity where it is needed, especially when our brothers and sisters are in trouble. It's very difficult for people in their country to voice out for them because they are also afraid for their lives. Thank you to our guests, participants that have been part of this conversation. I've enjoyed reading the various comments in the chats, seeing how you guys are very interested in the activities of solidarity and mobilization, and we are hoping that in the nearest future, as members of the network that we are putting together, we will start acting on all the suggestions and all the advice and proposals that have been made on this call. This is something that we are starting, and it will be very regular, because we also want to strengthen the entire space in which we are, and then to see how best that when someone is in trouble, we can all bear that responsibility as if we are also in trouble, and get to act and make sure that all our actions bring very formidable results in the space. And of course, contributing to the development of the continent of Africa. We are very grateful and hoping to see you during our next convening. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prince. Really appreciate. Lastly, Hadi, if you could give your closing remarks before we can just close off. Thanks.
I mean, I don't have much to add to what has been said. I think we have learned a lot from the conversations. What I would say is just to repeat what I said earlier, that we are operating on the basis that if anything happens to any African anywhere, it affects every African everywhere. And from that understanding, what I would say is we must not relent. We must not allow ourselves to get dejected, because the work is huge. But once we are working together in unison, we will achieve our dreams. And in conclusion, I'll just use this opportunity to invite everybody on this call, and through them to all their friends and connections, wherever they are, to join us in our solidarity action for Sudan that is coming up in a little over 2 weeks. That is a critical, practical show of people's force, of masses, to demand that there should be peace in Sudan, and that there should be an end to the genocide that is ongoing. So thank you all very much, and God bless us all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hadi, and thank you so much to everyone who took time to join our convening today. I'd like to urge everyone. I've seen Elemba saying this is the first time interacting on such a platform. So I'd like to encourage you to also just like our social media platform on Facebook, Africans Rising, Instagram, Africans Rising. To X, you can also find us, Africans Rising. We share more updates, and also we also share more information on the campaigns that we're running, like the Day of Solidarity with Sudan. You can be able to find more information when you follow our social media platforms. So thank you so much, everyone. I wish you all a good afternoon, a good morning, wherever you are. Bye-bye, and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.